Hello and welcome to today's session. We look at Act 2 of this play, You Can't Take It With You. And we've already seen how the setting has been arranged and how the tone has been set for the play. And when Act 2 begins, we are introduced to a new character. There's a newcomer, Gay Wellington. And we find that Penny, who enjoys writing scripts, she stands with one of her scripts as left of the table, and Ed is standing to the right of the table. Donald stands back of Gay Wellington, holding a tray of used dinner dishes. Gay is drinking as curtain rises, and Ed is standing holding type stick. Yeah. So Penny is ready to read the new play to Miss Wellington, and we find that again there's a very inclusive space over here, welcoming newer characters, and everyone is sort of familiar with what is happening in the family, and this inclusivity is also being foregrounded as a very American thing over here, in simultaneously, in realist as well as in sarcastic ways. The situational comedy here, becomes accentuated with the entry of every character, and it also brings out a different side of each character whom we have already met. So there is some discussion about again, Penny's this engagement with playwriting, and a lot of opinions, as always, about offered by different members of the family. So we will quickly skip this part, and I strongly encourage you to read through this in detail. So from this, we'll quickly move on to this scene where they are getting prepared. They are preparing themselves to meet the Kirbys. Yeah. So Tony Kirby, with whom Alice has a romantic relationship. So they are inviting the Kirbys are being invited over for dinner. So this is how Alice would love to prepare for the big day, for the evening. Look, mother, I'm coming home at 3 o'clock tomorrow. Will you have everything down in the cellar by that time? The typewriter, the snakes, the xylophone, the printing press. Yeah, so this is how the living room looks as at the moment. So it is certainly an odd sight for anyone who is coming in. The typewriter, the snakes, the xylophone, the printing press. And of course, we find that Miss Wellington continues to stay there and she's drinking over there. She needs to be removed from the scene as well. So, Grandpa is saying the Kirbys are certainly going to get the wrong impression of this house. Yeah, he does not want to hide what the family is. So he's also articulating his concern about that. But still, Alice sticks to his plan about Reba cooking. She's also wondering whether Reba should be allowed to, whether they should let Reba cook dinner. From what I've seen of the boy, I'm sure the Kirbys are very nice people, and if everything isn't so elaborate tomorrow night, it is all right too. Yeah, so that's another thing about this play, the way these characters are being pitched, these families are being pitched against each other. There are no villains over here. It is not that the Kirbys are essentially bad people. Yeah, both families, they are nice people with their own eccentricities and with their own issues. It is just about arriving, finding this midway where they can communicate as well. Um, so Alice is also trying to justify this. I'm not trying to impress them or pretend we are anything that we aren't. I just want everything to go off well. No reason why it shouldn't, Alice. Yeah, of course, she wants to uh, not in a very pretentious way, though. She wants to hide certain embarrassing facts and certain things which could become uncomfortable because she's the only one who has any real connect with the world outside. So they're all prepared to make this very good party. So in between, the rest of the family, they continue doing their thing. Essie is trying to continue with her practice. At the same time, she's also making candy. We also find that there is something slightly problematic that they will soon get into. And Colin Cove now comes up with this, very interesting piece of information. He should have been Russia when the revolution came. Then he would have stood in line, in a bread line. Our grandpa, what they have done to Russia, think of it. The Grand Duchess, Olga Katrina, a cousin of the Tsar, she's a waitress in a certain restaurant over here. I ordered baked beans from her only yesterday. It broke my heart, a crazy world. So there is a changing world order over here, which, if there's something, international world order is changing, and it's something the play is drawing attention to without getting into a discussion about it. And what is very admirable about a play like this is that, yeah, these characters do try to normalize the situation. Yeah, it is, what Colin Cove is entirely right. It's very tragic what the situation that he has just described, and it's entirely crazy too. But the way the play chooses to go ahead with it, it's in a very self-reflexive way. There is an attempt, there's a deliberate attempt to make everything into a bearable comedy, to make everything into a situational farce, and they quite successfully they do it. They quite successfully do that as well. So Colin Cove also asked this question. Perhaps it's also indicative about some a question from the audience as well. How can you relax in times like these? This is in response to what the grandpa says. Life is pretty simple if you just relax. Yeah. And grandpa of all the people, he is the one who's qualified to give these advices to not just to Colin Cove, but also to these well accomplished, the successful industrial people such as the Kirbys. Well, if they'd relax, there wouldn't be times like these. That's just my point. Life is kind of beautiful if you let it come to you. Yeah. So there are these snippets of conversation where a lot of philosophical depth could be read into it, but it's not the kind of play which will, continue to, harp on those aspects. But the point is not lost on the audience at all. But the trouble is, people forget that. I know I did. I was right in the thick of it, fighting and scratching and clawing, regular jungle. One day it kind of struck me I wasn't having any fun. So we also realized that there are certain common elements which have brought all of these characters together. They were all stuck, in some uncomfortable, unpleasant rut in life when they suddenly realized that they're really not living life to the fullest, and then they need to take a detour and move on to do something that they actually love doing. And Colin Cove again briefly gets back to this discussion, and he makes this point. No, Grandpa, you cannot relax with Stalin in Russia. The Tsar relaxed, and what happened to him? Grandpa says he was too late. Yeah, if he had not relaxed, Grand Duchess Olga Katrina would not be selling baked beans today. So this is also like another side of reality which the play does not forget to foreground. Yeah, it's also like it's laying out a number of things over here for the audience to choose. Yeah, it is trying to bring things from together from different points of view, different worldviews. There is clearly, of course, a celebration. There's clearly a celebration of a non-conformist point of view, but it's also accommodating. It's also putting in the other points of view for one to see and evaluate. Yeah, that is perhaps the one of the winning formulas of this play. Like it's laying out everything for us to be able to evaluate, and which is why even after decades, the play continues to be a success when it is revived, when it is adapted and readapted. So now we get into the core of this act. Yeah. So when we saw at the beginning of this act that Alice and the rest of the family, they are preparing for the Kirbys to receive the Kirbys for dinner, and something really there's a twist over here. There's a second pause, and then the reason is revealed in all its horror. The Kirbys in full evening dress stand in archway. All three of them, Mr. and Mrs. Kirby and Tony. Yeah. So there is certainly, this is a very disastrous situation because the family is not prepared to meet them. Yeah, things have not been hidden from, away from, they're taken away from the living room. The snakes are still there, the typewriter is still there, the xylophone is still there, and all of them are there in their usual chaotic self. So they all show up, and the Vanderhoff Sycamore family, they are least prepared for it. Grandpa alone rises to the situation with a kind of old world grace. He puts down his newspaper and makes the guests welcome. Yeah, good evening, how do you do? And the Kirbys also sense that there is some discomfort. Are we too early? No, no, come right in. It's perfectly all right. We are glad to see you. So it's also there's certain. It's very unmodern in a certain way. It's very un-American in a certain way, where they are ready to welcome guests at any point of time. And Penny is they can't put up a show beyond a point. Penny says we thought it was to be tomorrow night. Tomorrow night? What? It's perfectly all right. Just make yourselves at home. Tony, how could you possibly? I don't know. I thought, really, Tony, this is most embarrassing. So there is an unpleasant situation over here, but let's see, how they begin to address this. Um, So very soon, Mrs. Kirby, she notices the snakes and she lets out a scream, and then, the snakes are being taken away into the kitchen. So the Kirbys begin to get a sense of the eccentricity about the family, how unconventional things are, and it also makes them uncomfortable in certain ways. So this is about, again, they apologize to each other, and Tony is also apologizing, though we know at a later point towards the end of the play that Tony had done this deliberately, just so his family would get a picture of what the Sycamores are really. Because Tony, in some form, like Alice, he's also able to see the nobility of these different pursuits. He's also see the nobility of what they are rejecting and what they have rejected and how they are, leading on with their lives. So coming back to this act, we find that Alice comes down and the sight is quite scary, and she freezes in her tracks because she's least prepared to welcome Kirby's. And also, like we are being told by Alice that Mr. Kirby, he suffers from indigestion, and one should be careful about the kind of food that they are ordering, they are making for him. And Colin Cove, being the kind of person that he is spelling out what he thinks it is. Perhaps it's not indigestion at all, Mr. Kirby. Perhaps you have stomach ulcers. Don't be absurd, Mr. Kolenkov. You mustn't mind Mr. Kolenkov, Mr. Kirby. He's a Russian, and Russians are inclined to look on the dark side. Yeah, Kolenkov, all right, I am Russian, but a friend of mine, a Russian, died from stomach ulcers. Yeah? So none of them are really making it easy. And this discussion on the indigestion, later we will see, it will come back again with Grandpa pointing out that perhaps the unhappiness is the root of all this indigestion. So they're trying to, Grandpa is trying to make them comfortable, and the Kirbys are also trying, being nice people, they are also trying their best to blend in. And there is a brief discussion about the industry. As a matter of fact, industry is now operating at 64% of full capacity, as against 82% in 1925. At that moment, yeah, Gay rises. Gay Wellington, if you remember, she was drunk, she was there in a corner. She rises and interrupting this. So this again, this is a tone. This is, in very metaphorically, it sums up the setting and tone into which the play is getting into. Yeah, there is economic depression. There are some details about what is happening out there on Wall Street, and there is this comic interruption, which does not make any sense. Of course, in 1929, and Gay, she weaves unsteadily across the room, singing. There was a young lady from Wheeling who had a remarkable feeling. Alice crosses the imposing figure of Kirby, intrigues Gay. She pinches his cheeks with that lunges on her way upstairs. Yeah. The Kirbys, of course, are considerably astounded by this exhibition. The Sycamores have watched it with varying degrees of frozen horror. Alice, in particular, is speechless. It is Grandpa who comes to her rescue. So this is also a comment this is also a commentary on how the play is responding to what is happening in the country at the moment. Yeah, there are certain very grave, morbid discussions about figures, about how things are going down, how it might take a while for the economy to pick up. Yeah, and also all of these discussions are interjected with the comicality of this play, with the farce that it is trying to provide as a tool of escape, as a tool to escape the reality. So the kind of little details that we get throughout this, it also further shows how they inhabit completely different worlds. You usually escape all this hot weather, don't you, Mrs. Kirby, up in Maine? Mrs. Kirby, as a rule, I had to come down for the flower show. Mother wouldn't miss that for the world. That blue ribbon is the high spot of the year. Yeah. So it is a very different world altogether, very different aspirations, very different ambitions and routines. And just when they get into the discussion about hobbies, yeah, because everything that they see in the Sycamore family, it's all pointing out towards something eccentric. They are, the Kirbys are genuinely unable to comprehend what it is. So Kirby is trying to neutralize that discussion, saying, I suppose every man has his hobby. Or do you use this as a model of some kind? No, I just play with it. Yeah. So this is certainly, these two gentlemen, they inhabit clearly different worlds. Yeah, their adult world views are very different, that they are not able to sink in with the idea of the hobby too. Hobby means very different for both of them. Maybe you would be better off if you had a hobby like that, Dad. Tony is trying to neutralize the situation here, instead of raising orchids. Yeah. So now the discussion. Alice also finds that as a very convenient distraction to take the family to to get the family to discuss about the orchids. Oh, do tell us about your orchids, Mr. Kirby. They take 6 years before they blossom, don't they? Think of that. And some of them longer than that. I've got one coming along that I waited for 10 years. Yeah. One of the things is that, on the one hand, they come across as very nonconformist, but there's also a certain inescapable practicality about them. Grandpa asks, it's kind of an expensive hobby, isn't it, Mr. Kirby? Raising orchids? Yes, it is, but I feel that if a hobby gives one sufficient pleasure, it's never expensive. That's very true. You see, I need something to relieve the daily nerve strain. After a week in Wall Street, I'd go crazy if I didn't have something like that. A lot of men I know have yachts just for that very reason. And Grandpa is asking another very practical question, which will only sound insane to Kirby's ears. Why don't they give up Wall Street? How's that? I was just joking. I think it's necessary for everyone to have a hobby. Of course, it's more to me than a hobby, but my great solace is spiritualism. This is Mrs. Kirby pitching in with what she thinks is her hobby. And Penny, being Penny, she's unable to unable to fake anything. And she says spiritualism. Now, Mrs. Kirby, everybody knows that's a fake. And again, Paul is also trying to intervene in this and trying to tell Penny that, you also have hobbies of your own. But according to her, writing plays, that's not a silly hobby. Yeah. But of course, going after spiritualism, that certainly is a silly hobby. So Grandpa is again, bringing it trying to bring in a resolution by saying the important thing is to have one. And Colin Cove also has a very tangential discussion about the Romans over there, about wrestling, and things again take a very prompt and ugly turn when, with a startling quick movement, Colin Cove grabs Kirby's arms, knocks his legs from under him with a quick movement of a foot, and presto, Kirby is flat on his what's his. So, and not only that, but instantaneously, Colin Cove is on top of him. So it takes a while for all of them to recover from that. Kirby does not want to wrestle, obviously, and Colin Cove fails to see what he did wrong. That, he fails to see how this had to take an unpleasant turn. So they try to talk about orchids, which does not work. And that is when, Penny comes up with this idea about why don't we all play a game of some sort? And this is perhaps, the deepest the play gets, with a certain unintentional, inadvertent psychological revelations particularly from the Kirbys. So they play this game, which Penny says they used to play it at school. It's called Forget Me Not. She will, call out 5 words, just anything at all, and the others are expected to put down the first thing that come to their mind. It's like a very free association. So, for instance, if she says grass, you might put down green, or chair, table. Yeah, so it's whatever comes to each person's mind in an instant. Yeah. So they begin to play this, and the first word is potatoes, and the next is bathroom, and lust, honeymoon, and finally sex. So some of these terms, Alice begins to wonder if that could cause some discomfort, but the Kirbys seem to be entirely game for that. And now they are reading out the responses. And Kirby, interestingly, he begins to take a fancy towards the game. It's really quite an interesting game. And now she's reading out the responses from first from Kirby's, Mr. Kirby's. Potatoes, steak. That's very good. See how they go together, steak and potatoes. Kirby, modestly but obviously pleased with himself, he seems to have given the right responses, as we would see over here. Yeah, he's giving, at least, he's trying to give the right responses and making it all sink in well, which is what he's also trying to do with his life. So Penny is in some way right that this game will also, tell us much about each character. Bathroom, toothpaste, lust, unlawful, honeymoon, trip, and sex, male. Very matter of fact, and something that's something which fits the correct box. Very conventional, the responses. And now, she moves on to read. Penny moves on to read what Mrs. Kirby has written. Potatoes, starch. I know just what you mean. Bathroom, Mr. Kirby. Yeah. So immediately Mr. Kirby takes offense, and Mrs. Kirby says, after all, you're in there a good deal, Anthony, bathing and shaving. Well, you do take a lot of time. Yeah. So, and Alice begins to realize the direction that the game could potentially take, and she wants to stop it. But Kirby also wants them to. The Kirby's also wants, but the Kirby's also want Penny to move on. So Penny continues. This is Mrs. Kirby's list: lust, human, and this is something which is entirely offensive, quite sacrilegious to Kirby, who had written down against lust as unlawful. Yeah. So really, Miriam, I just meant Anthony that lust is after all a human emotion. I don't agree with you, Miriam. Lust is not a human emotion. It's depraved. Very well, Anthony, I'm wrong. It quite sums up the compatibility between them, or rather, the incompatibility between them and the worldviews that they hold, which are very, very different. This is a very telling revelation, given that they are being pitched against the sycamores, who are entirely seen as eccentric, who are seen as completely irrelevant too in the context of the society that they are living in. But at least they seem to be in sync in the philosophy, in their approach towards life. There are no surprises that the sycamores can spring on each other. But here, with this simple game, we find that the Kirbys, Mr. Kirby and Mrs. Kirby, they're also surprising each other about the value systems that they hold. And it's also, quite telling how little they know about each other. How little they know about the each other's opinion about themselves. And this takes a very interesting uh, turn. And now the next one, then the next thing in the list, honeymoon, dull. So that's sort of that works as almost like a the final nail in the coffin. Kirby, murderously calm. Did you say dull? What I meant, Anthony, was that Hot Springs was not very gay that season. All those old people sitting on the porch all afternoon and nothing to do at night, realizing she has gone too far. Yeah? So this space, this family space, becomes very liberating for the Kirbys, though not in a very nice, surprising way. That was not your reaction at the time, as I recall it. Tony, father, this is only a game, a very illuminating game. Go on, Mrs. Sycamore. So Penny is, very pepped up, very pumped up about this. This one's all right. Sex, Wall Street. Wall Street? What do you mean by that, Miriam? I don't know what I meant, Anthony. Nothing. But you must have meant something, Miriam, or you wouldn't have put it down. Yeah. So being pushed to, spell out what she had in mind, Mrs. Kirby goes with it. It was just the first thing that came into my head. That's all. But what does it mean? Sex? Wall Street? Mrs. Kirby is now annoyed and she just spells it out. Oh, I don't know what that means, Anthony. It's just that you're always talking about Wall Street, even when she catches herself. I don't know what I meant. Would you mind terribly, Alice, if we didn't stay for dinner? So the damage has already been done. I'm afraid this game has given me a headache. So, what is most interesting is that it is not the sycamores who gave a headache to Mrs. Kirby. It is not the sycamores who made things uncomfortable between Mr. Kirby and Mrs. Kirby. It is those, the unresolved issues or the things that they have never spoken about before. And it's quite obvious that, in their very politically correct, sophisticated setting, they've never discussed these matters of lust, of sex, of the time that they spend in bathroom. And these are the things which come to the forefront only when they are in a space like the Vanderhoff Sycamore family. Interestingly, that living room becomes this space of where immense psychological liberation is possible, where anyone can voice anything that they have in their mind without feeling any hesitation about it. Yeah? And in the Sycamore family, they are never judged for being anything, for having any opinion, for being, for having any of those, having this value system or the other value system, or not having a value system. Right. So again, the dinner is being brought to a very abrupt end for obvious reasons. And just when the Kirbys are about to leave, yeah, something more dramatic is happening. And even for the Kirbys, this night turns out to be unusually eccentric, unusually dramatic. Yeah. So we find that before the Kirbys can take more than a step toward the door, a new figure looms up in the archway. It's a quiet and competent looking individual with a steely eye, and two more just like him loom up behind him. Stay right where you are, everybody. There is a little scream from Mrs. Kirby, an exclamation from Penny. Don't move. Oh, good heavens, how dare you? Why this? Why? What does this mean? What is all this? I demand an explanation. Keep your mouth shut. So The Kirbys are in this situation for the first time, perhaps, but even for the Sycamores, yeah, this is a very unusual situation. So this is about Edward Carmichael. I haven't done anything. You haven't, huh? This seems rather high-handed to me. What is it all about? But if you notice, Grandpa is not scared here at all. So he's from the Department of Justice. What have you done? I haven't done anything. What's a Boyd an officer? What is it? What's it all about? Yeah. That door lead to the cellar? Yes, it does. Yeah. So take a look upstairs and see what you find. Ed is continuing to say, I haven't done anything. And this man who is there, from the Department of Justice, he takes some slips of paper out of his pocket. Ever seen these before? These are my circulars. Yeah, you print this stuff, huh? And you put them into boxes of candy to get them to people's homes. So this is what they had been doing all day that day, distributing candy, and they had been using these circulars that Ed had been printing out too. So this is how the circulars read: dynamite the Capitol, dynamite the White House, dynamite the Supreme Court. God is the state is God. I didn't mean that. I just like to print, don't I, Grandpa? Printing is just his hobby. That's all. He prints anything. So here is a family, just the way they do not understand the logic or the rationale behind income tax, they also do not understand how printing is also political activity, how printing is also an activity for which one needs the state's permission, how these could be, how these sort of words that printing and circulating certain kind of words could be seen as seditious. So here they are now being arrested very soon for circulating such a seditious material, and just in the middle of this, yeah. So as I mentioned, this is an unusual night, even by the standards of the Sycamore family. A whole year's supply of fireworks just goes off. So in the cellar, there is the entire fire crackers. They all just go off because Deepena didn't do something right. It was his pipe which was responsible for it. So right after this, we find that in the middle of all this, Penny is bothered about saving her manuscripts. Ed is worried about his xylophone, and they are all now they have to spend the night in jail as this the Act 2 comes to an end. So very quickly we will move on to Act 3, where it's a following day, and they are back to their their living room, and in their mind, if you go through the way they begin to talk about it, nothing seems to have changed for them. They are going about it just in a regular way, and they are also able to, in a way, hilariously talk about the time that they had spent in jail. So Donald saying, I was in the cell with Mr. Kirby. He was mad. Yeah. So Donald and Reba are having this conversation. Now the crisis is not about having spent the day in jail, about what happened right after that, because now Alice is preparing to leave home because all this became a bit too much for her, and she is preparing to leave home and spend time in the mountains, as as the play tells us. So Donald and Reba also have this very brief exchange over here about how. Ever notice how white folks always getting themselves in trouble? Yeah, sure. I'm glad I'm colored. Yeah. So we'll quickly move on from here, and we will notice that almost the entire family, they are all unhappy that they made Alice unhappy, because that is not what any of them wanted to do through these their actions. So Penny and Paul, they are having this exchange. They think they have wronged Alice in some form. I can't help it, Paul. Somehow I feel it's our fault. It's mine more than yours, Penny. All these years I've just been going along, enjoying myself, when maybe I should have been thinking more about Alice. Don't say that, Paul. You've been a wonderful father and husband too. So contrast this with the Kirbys. Yeah. So in spite of this, there is a way in which the family is able to stick together in a very human way. And Paul says, maybe if I'd gone ahead and been an architect, something Alice could have been proud of. I felt that all last night looking at Mr. Kirby. So they're not they're not unrealistic in certain ways. They're all able to see where Alice comes from as well. Yeah. So Paul also realizes how he's all mixed up now. But Penny also reassures him that, but we've been so happy. That seems to be again the bottom line of this play. So, and Yeah, and the grandpa is also, reliving the previous night's events. Well, Mr. Kirby getting into the wagon for one thing, and the expression on his face when he and Donald had to take a bath together. I'll never forget that. If I live to be 100, and I warn you people, I intend to. If I can have things like that going on, yeah. So he is able to see the bright side of all this, and he's able to see humor in spite of, what has happened. So Alice, she wants to quietly go away and to be herself. And there is some brief instance which kind of justifies her decision. She is asking Paul whether he had phoned for a cab. I didn't know you wanted one. Oh, I told Mr. Deepina to tell you, Paul. Didn't he tell you? Oh, he told me, but I forgot. Alice, that's a final straw for her. Even after all this, they just do not seem to be getting it. Oh, I wish I lived in a family that didn't always forget everything, that behave the way other people's families do. I'm sick of cornflakes and Donald and oh everything. Why can't we be like other people? Roast beef and two green vegetables and doilies on the table and a place you could bring your friends to without, yeah. She does not complete that sentence without being embarrassed, without, perhaps, ending up in jail. So So grandpa is trying to look at the bright side of it. Yeah. So there was a bright side to everything, all except my 23 years back income tax. Yeah, that is the only real thing that he has encountered as far as he's concerned over here. Um, what are you going to do about that, grandpa? Well, I had a kind of an idea yesterday. It may not work, but I'm trying anyhow. Yeah. So even before they complete the discussion, Colin Koff comes in with the Grand Duchess of Olga Katrina, who's now a waitress in the restaurant. And this is also, she's taken a day off because it's the anniversary of Peter the Great. So there is some insight into the Russian history and how, she is reliving that day. And she also, she's a guest who's being very well received in the family. And that is something, they all switched to the old world order at that moment. And they welcome Duchess Olga as a duchess, not as a waitress. And she also offers to cook for them. So it is, even though they are spending the day right after having spent the night in jail, and even though Alice is about to go away, there is a certain normalcy that this play is continued to maintain, that all of these members are continue to maintain in spite of the circumstances. Yeah, so there's also, a very brief, some attention is being given to certain other members like the Grand Duke Sergei, who works as an elevator man at Macy's, and is also drawing attention to how the situation in Russia is really bad, and how they are also trying to um, make both ends meet by working in these various odd menial jobs in America, in New York. Yeah, so yeah, and there are also these Deepina, who's also a historian at heart. Yeah, he asks whether it's true what they say about Rasputin, and of course she also confirms that yes, everyone wants to know about Rasputin. It is true, and how. Yeah, so she also has rushed. She has to leave, and she says, "Yeah, the manager does not like me." This in the restaurant where she works as the waitress. The manager does not like me. He's a communist, right? But she offers to cook for them some blintzes. Yeah. So this is the setting before Tony walks in, and Tony is also, trying to convince Alice to stay, and he immediately realizes that you've got the stubbornest daughter in all 48 states, and Grandpa also comes to join the discussion. So Mr. Kirby is also there. So as mentioned at the beginning, it's not like they're not essentially evil people. They don't want them to separate in an irrational way. But Mr. Kirby realizes that they come from very different worlds altogether. So Grandpa is now trying to have a conversation with Mr. Kirby. I'm not the kind of person tries to run into other people's lives, but the fact is, Mr. Kirby, I don't think these two young people have got as much sense as you and I have. Yeah, but initially, even Mr. Kirby feels that they are not really fit for each other, because I'm not accustomed to going out to dinner and spending the night in jail. Yeah, and Grandpa says, this was a wrong night, even as per the Sycamore standards. This is not a regular night. Yeah, this is something which some things went wrong in an unusually dramatic way. So Kirby wants to make this point that they are perhaps not suited for this, for each other. It was not merely last night that convinced Mrs. Kirby and Mr. and myself that this engagement would be unwise. Tony obviously wants to make his point and say that he can handle his own affairs, but Grandpa gives it a more philosophical depth. Who says they are right and we are wrong? Yeah, and he's also trying to convince Alice that trying to make her understand things from his point of view. And this is where he makes perhaps one of the strongest statements in this entire play. What I feel is that Tony's too nice a boy to wake up 20 years from now on with nothing in his life but stocks and bonds. Yeah. So Grandpa says, this is him telling this to Alice and Kirby, that one would end up being mixed up and unhappy. Yeah. So, and he makes this very bold statement that, what do you think you get your indigestion from? Happiness? No, sir. You get it because most of your time is spent in doing things you don't want to do. Yeah. And Kirby gets very defensive and says that it is his business. But this is how Grandpa defines Kirby's business. Same kind of email every morning, same kind of deals, same kind of meetings, same dinners at night, same indigestion. Where does the fun come in? Don't you think there ought to be something more, Mr. Kirby? You must have wanted more than that when you started out. We haven't got too much time, any one of us. What do you expect me to do, live the way you do? Well, I have a lot of fun, time enough for everything. Read, talk, visit the zoo now and then, practice my darts, even have time to notice when spring comes around. So this is a very fine take on life. Yeah? The philosophy here is not just about pursuing one's passion and pleasure. It's also about taking time to enjoy life, to value life. So it's much deeper than the superficial, eccentric things that are being foregrounded over here. Yeah, and Grandpa is also being realistic. Kirby asks, the matter with that, suppose we all did it, a fine world we'd have, everybody going to zoos. Grandpa is not being unrealistic here either. It's not a utopian, dream that he is foregrounding. There's always people uh, there's always people that like to work. You can't stop them. Inventions, they fly the ocean. There are always people who go down to Wall Street too because they like it. But from what I've seen of you, I don't think you're one of them. Because Wall Street, according to Kirby himself, it drives him crazy and he needs something else, the orchids, to relax. That is something he loves to do, though it's an expensive hobby. So Kirby is saying, he's still continuing to be defensive. I'm not aware of missing anything. And Grandpa gives another profound advice. I wasn't either till I quit. I used to get down to that office 9 o'clock sharp, no matter how I felt. Lay awake nights for fear I wouldn't get that contract. Used to worry about the world too. So he's familiar with that side of the world. He's not someone who was always like this. He was not someone who always was this carefree and always wanted to live, always could live life the way he wanted to. Got all worked up about whether Cleveland or Blaine was going to be elected president. Seemed awful important at the time. So here is, a very judicious, a very judicious rejection of economy and polity, but not in a very clear, indifferent way, in a way that, it gives enough space for the individual to be foregrounded. But who cares now? What I'm trying to say, Mr. Kirby, is that I've had 35 years that nobody can take away from me, no matter what they do to the world. So now, Kirby makes this, which is also, a point that the play perhaps is trying to make. It's un-American. So that is what makes the family like Sycamore slightly, off limits. It's what makes this family look very odd, yeah, very exaggerated, because it's very un-American. It's exactly why I'm opposed to this marriage. And Kirby also thinks it is downright communism. So we do see what this lifestyle that, the philosophy of life that the Sycamores are standing for, what that gets translated, in what forms it gets translated into the world outside as un-American, as something very communist. Yeah. So this is when, as we begin to wrap up this discussion, this is when Tony draws attention to the fact that, he had access to some of the letters of his father, where he realizes that at 18, he wanted to be a saxophone player. Yeah. And now Kirby is again getting defensive and trying to reject that. Yeah. And Tony reveals this, that it was on purpose that he had brought them to that house just so, there will be some sort of an event which will make them understand their own selves better. Yeah, and now we realize that watershed event was quite useful for them to understand themselves and also for them to understand each other. And with this, more importantly, Tony reaches this self realization because I wanted you to wake up. I wanted you to see a real family as they really were, a family that loved and understood each other. You don't understand me. You've never had time. Well, I'm not going to make your mistake. I'm clearing out. Clearing out, what do you mean? I mean, I'm not going to be pushed into the business just because I'm your son. I'm getting out while there's still time. But Tony, what are you going to do? I don't know. Maybe I'll be a bricklayer, but at least I'll be doing something I want to do. So this is a whole point. This is a whole philosophy that the play has been trying to push for as well. So the penny also, then decides to stay back, as we would see, and Grandpa is seeing Kirby, Tony, trying to, uh, Grandpa is seeing a little of himself in young Tony. Tony is going through just what you and I did when we were his age. I think if you listen hard enough, you can hear yourself saying the same things to your father 25 years ago. We all did it and we were right. How many of us would be willing to settle when we are young for what we eventually get? All those plans we make, what happens to them? It's only a handful of the lucky ones that can look back and say that they even came close. So before they clean out that closet, Mr. Kirby, I think I'd get in a few hours on that saxophone. Yeah. So this is this is how this family operates. There is infinite capacity to oscillate between the big and small things in life. They are philosophizing, but at the same time paying attention to the saxophone and paying attention to the blitzes that Olga Katrina has made for dinner. So they are all staying back for dinner, and the play comes. This is bringing the play to an end. And towards the end, Grandpa receives the letter from the government again, perhaps again about the taxes. Things do not fundamentally change. The Sycamore family fundamentally does not change, but they become, they are able to ask certain questions which are not uncomfortable for the family, which are not uncomfortable for them, but it becomes a discomfort, which also triggers a change in the Kirby's family. So with this, we and the play ends on a very pleasant note, and it also leaves these questions. There's no solution, there's no preachy solution that the play leaves for us at the end of it, but there are these questions which are looming really high given the historical context and given its continuing relevance, because we are all inhabiting similar kinds of socio-political and economic conditions even in the contemporary. That's how the modern society has been fashioned, uh, uh, has been made to function in a systematic way. So, with this, we bring this discussion to an end. I thank you for your time and I look forward to seeing you in the next session.